age, they only think about their stomachs and pockets and what would benefit them. I mean, I think it was Winston Churchill who said, "Those who serve supreme causes should consider what they can give to the people rather than what they can get."
Good morning, Kathy. This is Ruth from Randburg. I just want to say that us South Africans, we like chaos. Jacob Zuma created chaos in this country, and that chaos still lives on. So many people that are criminals love what he's done and what he's still going to do. Watch out. This country in 10 years' time will be no more.
Morning, Katie. The issue that's happening between the MK and ANC and the world of business, we call it an innovation. If you don't play the game, they will play you. And I like this initiation. They should watch out. COSATU might form the Workers' Party. COSATU might form the Workers' Party. ANC Youth League, they might form the political party due to the lack of generational mixing in that particular organization. What they're doing to the middle and working class, it's nonsense. It's very nonsense. I warn them, let them watch out.
SAfm 104 to 107 nationwide.
Channel your inner adventurer on Top Travel this Saturday night at 8:30 on S3 as Fez and Anesu are in Limpopo for tea with a rooibos-loving hippo named Jessica. Jumping off Graskop Gorge in Mpumalanga, Fez screams from the top all the way to the bottom. But standing at God's window will leave anyone speechless. That's Top Travel this Saturday night at 8:30. Repeat Sunday at 1 p.m. on S3.
When you vote on the 29th of May 2024, you will receive 3 ballot papers. The blue national ballot is for political parties contesting seats in the National Assembly. The orange regional ballot is for political parties and independent candidates who will represent your area in the National Assembly. The pink ballot is for political parties and independent candidates to represent you in your provincial legislature. Vote where you are registered. Visit elections.org.za for more information. It's your democracy. Own it.
Last year, the Masked Singer hit South Africa like a storm. This year, the Masked Singer South Africa returns with 16 huge celebrities hidden behind 16 humongous masks. Get ready to be amazed and astonished with brand new masks and performances that are going to blow your mind. Don't miss the biggest television event since Season 1. The Masked Singer South Africa Season 2 premieres on S3 Saturday 6 April at 6:30 p.m.
The Talking Point with Kathy Motlatlana. Weekdays, 9 a.m. till midday.
Well, we continue leading the conversation here on SAfm. It is our Citizens Corner, and today we're focusing on the partnership between the IEC, the Information Regulator, and Media Monitoring Africa. Joining us for this conversation, Mfana Gwala is a commissioner at the Information Regulator. Mr. Gwala, good morning. Mr. Gwala?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Good morning.
Yes, good morning, Katie, and good morning to the listeners of SAfm.
Also on the line is William Bird. He's the director at Media Monitoring Africa. William, good morning.
Good morning, Kathy. Thanks for having me on the program.
And just to our listeners, I know I had already said that the Deputy Chief Executive Officer of the IEC will be joining us. Unfortunately, they've had an urgent meeting, so he's no longer able to come on to contribute to this conversation. But perhaps, Mr. Gwala, let me begin with you. Tell us about this partnership between the IEC and yourselves.
Yeah, Kathy, firstly, I think it's important also just to highlight a bit the responsibility of the regulator and then talk about the relationship between the IEC and, in fact, the Media Monitoring Africa. you would know that we are responsible for the rights that are contained in the Constitution, which is Section 14 and Section 2 of the Constitution, right to privacy and access to information. So we were created specifically to deal with those two and protect those two rights. But the laws that were subsequently then enacted was POPIA, which is the Protection of Personal Information Act, and the Promotion of Access to Information Act, to give meaning to those two rights. So what we've done with the IEC was that we picked up that there's a lot of issues that occur during elections, such as the dissemination of information, and in that process we have misinformation and disinformation, information that is not accurate, and information that is biased in favor of certain parties with the view to mislead the public. So we felt that it is important. The IEC is responsible for running the elections, but at the same time we are also responsible to make sure that people have access to accurate and credible information. And for that to be able to achieve that, we need partnerships like the ones that we've just established between ourselves, the IEC, and Media Monitoring Africa.
What you are talking about is, of course, crucial. I think just in general, on the eve of an election, it becomes even more important. But I'm curious to understand a little bit better in terms of the involvement then of the regulator, especially because much of the misinformation, disinformation that would be available online or wherever it is that one may find it is being produced sometimes by third parties that are unknown, very difficult to track down. So the intervention then from the regulator in that regard, what kind of intervention is it?
Kathy, we have a responsibility, amongst others, to monitor and enforce the compliance with the two pieces of legislation that I've just spoken about, but basically with the intention to protect the right of privacy of individuals and corporate bodies, and secondly, to enforce compliance. Yes, it remains a challenge. I think for all regulators, it's always a challenge to regulate what sometimes is known as the dark sort of sector. Because most of the time, like we are saying, the difficulty is that those people in most cases are unknown. You've seen the issues of security compromise, for an example, where people will basically take charge or hack a system in order to have access to a data held by a specific body, and it becomes difficult to track those people, and then they demand all sorts of things, including ransom. So that's why, in most cases, we also, I think what the Act says is that in a situation where there has been a security compromise on data of data subject, first and foremost, you should report the matter to the police, and in this case, the Hawks, and also report it to the regulator. The regulator, obviously, the purpose is to assess the extent to which the compromise has affected, compromise the data of subject, and the measures that have been taken to try and mitigate and prevent these all sorts of things from happening. So my admission is that it's difficult to deal with people who are illegal. It's easy to deal with people who are in the public domain, who are operating legally.
William, as Media Monitoring Africa, you are part of this partnership. Speak to us about it from your point of view. So why the need for the partnership, and what in particular are your interests?
So I think it's really important because effectively I think it does a number of things. It highlights the need for a multi-stakeholder approach to dealing with these complex challenges around mis and disinformation. And the flip side to that is, of course, transparency and accountability So the IEC's role and the information regulator's role, that has been outlined, is very much around, ensuring compliance with PIA and POPIA. But that compliance is critical because if political parties, for example, are open and transparent about how they operate, who funds them, etc., and they are more respecting of various rights, is it creates less paths of opportunity for people to spread mis and disinformation. So if, for example, we didn't know how political parties were being funded, and it would be very easy then to just say, oh, they're being funded by this and this evil entity, or this party is being funded by the CIA or something like that, right? So one of the reasons that transparency is important is because it then allows anyone to go and look and see who's funding them. So the information regulator actually did some really interesting research where they found that most of the political, or none of the political parties currently in Parliament are compliant or fully compliant with the PIA regulations. Now that kind of thing means that where you aren't compliant with the law as it stands, it means that there's an opportunity for people to easily spread mis and disinformation about you. So it's an important and valuable partnership precisely because it deals with the flip side of that coin, right? Which is how to combat and mitigate mis and disinformation, which is something that we're doing a lot of at the moment. And some of those things are like Real 411. And at the same time, how to build that positive obligation and positive respect and encouragement and adherence and compliance with the law through, for example, your adherence to POPIA and the other rules and regulations, the code of conduct that the IEC has got. So that when you look at these things as a whole, it starts to build a far more comprehensive, clear picture so that it just provides less avenues for people to spread mis and disinformation.
William, a conversation that we can never exhaust is one that looks at the difference between misinformation and disinformation. It becomes especially important when you have different individuals and parties on the campaign trail making all sorts of statements. Sometimes the waters get incredibly muddied, right? And it's difficult, because some statements they have a little bit of truth in it, but not quite completely all true. So let's just, for the benefit of all of us, really unpack what is misinformation and what is disinformation.
And I think that to add to that point is it's like what is normal politicking, right, and electioneering, because those are things where we all know as a member of the public that political parties are going to go out there and they're going to say, we're the best and everyone else is rubbish, right? That's pretty much electioneering. That's what political parties are meant to do. We know that they are going to sell themselves as the best things in sliced bread, and other parties are not as good as they are if they don't want to be openly antagonistic to them. Now, the difference between that and something like disinformation, when we talk about disinformation, we talk about spreading false information, so information that isn't true. It's not verifiable as factual. So if I were to say that the earth is in fact flat as opposed to round, that is something that you can easily go and verify. Right?
Careful, William. There are people who believe the world is flat.
Well, that's very nice for them, and they're entitled to believe that. If they go around and they say, so that, for example, and you go and spread that is misinformation because it simply isn't true, right? If you go around and you start to spread false information that has the potential for public harm, and you do so intentionally. So generally speaking, I mean, there's no global definition of these things, but generally speaking, the difference between mis and disinformation comes down to intention. Do you intend to spread something that's false, and do you intend it to cause harm? If you do, that's probably then disinformation as opposed to misinformation. So if you go around and say, that the world is flat, that's misinformation. You're not going to cause public harm because you and I know that in our daily operations, if we're going to get on a flight from one side of the world to the other, we're not actually going to fly off the edge of the earth and disappear into space. We know that we're going to land on the other side of the world and go about our business, whatever that may be. If you, however, go around and start saying things like the IEC is deeply corrupted, they are going to manipulate the election results so that the ANC wins, that becomes disinformation. When you start to say that something that discourages people then from exercising their rights in a manner that is going to allow them to participate fully. Because if you believe that the IEC is so compromised that they can't run free and fair elections, then you're going to go, well, why would I want to vote? There's no point to voting if the outcome is predetermined. It means it's not free and fair. And if it's not a free and fair election, then it's not democracy. So that kind of disinformation can actively undermine democracy. And that is really what it comes down to, as opposed to something where politicians are going around saying, we're the best. You know, that's fine. We know that they're going to be saying those things. They're going to exaggerate. They may even, you know, say things about other parties that are simply not true. Again, if it comes down to causing the potential for causing public harm, then that's a very different kind of a thing, as opposed to just standard electioneering and trying to boast about how great your party is or how terrible other parties are.
Mfana, we talked about how difficult it can be sometimes to get accountability, because those that often are the creators of disinformation do so in the deep dark web. But the point that William is making is that as things stand, on the eve of an election, you have political parties, you have individuals. These people are within reach. So what are the frameworks then that govern matters of misinformation and disinformation as it relates to political parties?
Yeah, Kathy, I think like William has pointed out, in dealing with misinformation and disinformation, that's why you need a multi-sectoral approach, because there are various pieces of laws and legislations that deal with this aspect. But like I've pointed out, with regard to Popia Empire, it empowers the regulator to then hold those people accountable. If we're of the view that the information that is out there is misleading, it's not credible, and it's done with the intention to mislead or misinform or disinform, then we're able to hold that particular party accountable.
All right. Well, sorry there, Mfana. I'm going to give you an opportunity to continue on the other side of the latest news headlines. It is 10:30. We're looking at this partnership, right, between the IEC, the Information Regulator, Media Monitoring Africa, all of it around ensuring that the principles of information distribution are protected, especially in the run-up to May 29th. It's time for the latest news headlines.
Good morning, I'm Anne Musa. In the headlines, 6 suspects have been arrested for the alleged hijacking and murder of Kaizer Chiefs defender Luke Vleers. The suspects were arrested in Slovovel in Soweto. The DA-MP Sello Setlolo says the admission by the Public Works Minister Sihle Zikalala that about 13.8 million rand may have been lost to corruption across the extended Public Works program may be a drop in the ocean. And the European Union's Fundamental Rights Agency has called for member countries to do more to tackle racism in policing. I'll have details on these and other stories at 11.
Taking a look at your markets this morning, the rand is currently trading at 18 rand 46 to the dollar, 23 rand 42 to the pound, and 20 rand 05 to the euro. Markets in Asia were mainly in the green at the closing bell. The JSE is higher in mid-morning trade. Markets in Europe are currently in positive territory. Gold is trading at $2,354, platinum $977 per ounce. The price of Brent crude oil is at $89.79 a barrel.
Across South Africa, online and on radio. SAfm, let's talk. #SAfm Talking Point.
We continue the conversation for Citizens Corner. Mfana Gwala is Commissioner at the Information Regulator, and we've got William Bird, Director at Media Monitoring Africa. So, Mr. Gwala, please break down for us, when you talk about being able to hold individuals, political parties accountable for misinformation and disinformation, what is the process that the regulator would follow to pursue somebody or an organization that has been found to be distributing misinformation?
Yes, Casey. The law enjoins us and empowers the regulator to, for an example, to receive complaints, because there are various ways and means in which we then get to know about some of these things. So people can complain to the regulator, and we can investigate the complaint. Sometimes we conduct our own initiative investigation and assessment. And like William has already pointed out, we've conducted, for an example, assessments of political parties that are represented in Parliament. And we found that, for example, the PIA says each and every, whether you're a private body or a public body, you have to have a PIA manual. The PIA manual, the purpose of it is to make sure that the information that is in your possession, it can be accessed by the members of the public or members of the organization that belongs to that party, for an example. But those documents or information in your possession needs to be specified in the manual. We found that, for an example, the issue of compliance with the provisions of the Electoral Act of disclosing funding that exceeds above 100,000. We found that a number of political parties were not complying in terms of disclosing this information, firstly in their own manual, and we found that a lot of them had not complied with making those manuals available and making a document that can be accessed by members of the public as easily available. So in those circumstances, we conduct the assessment, we issue a report, which we then expect a body to comply. Failure to comply, obviously, we've got instruments or sanctions that can be sort of meted out against that specific party.
Let's talk about the example that you've given, because it's a working example by the sounds of it. So for the political parties that you found were not compliant, you gave them an opportunity to comply. How long did you give them?
Yeah, normally we depending on the, we always treat the case on its own merit, but we normally give them a period that is, in our view, reasonable for them to comply. Like, for an example, I'm saying the PIA manuals, we found that a lot of them had not complied PIA manuals, and those that had complied PIA manuals, those manuals were outdated, because the Act expects that if there's information contained in those manuals, that information must always be up to date, accurate, and credible.
Yes. So what I'm asking is, when you conducted this assessment, right, through which you discovered there was such little compliance,
yes,
when did you conduct that assessment?
I think in the last financial year, which is 2020. 2023.
Okay, so so there's been then a time for the political parties to comply. How long did you give them to comply?
Well, I think in most cases, and I'm speaking under correction here, in most cases, like I'm saying, depending on the level of compliance for those that attempted to comply, at the most we would give people about 30 days to comply. But also, when we compile these reports, we refer them back we share them with the respective political parties, and some of them have actually complied, quite expeditiously.
I guess what I'm trying to get to, Mfana, is to really understand whether the issue of compliance, the issue of monitoring is being done as some form of tick box exercise because the regulator has to be seen to be doing this work, or if in fact there is follow through that communicates to these political parties that if you do not take this seriously, there is some kind of consequence that will follow.
Yes, that's the point I'm making, that the Act, both the pieces of legislation, COPIA and PIA, empowers the regulator to impose penalties for non-compliance. I mean, you might have seen some examples, even though some of them had to do with security compromises, where information has been compromised in the possession of public and private bodies, where we've issued out infringement notices, and in certain circumstances we've even issued fines. Because the Act says we can even issue fines and actually approach court to impose custodial sentences against the heads of those private bodies or the information officers of those public and private bodies. So, yes, there are consequences, and some of them are quite severe.
But you have not done this with political parties.
Well, it has not been necessary at this stage to do that. But what we've done, we've issued notices for them to comply. And a notice is more like a court order. It's equivalent to a court order. Once we issue a notice for you to comply, failure to comply, you will be held in contempt. And it has its own consequences.
William, I'm thinking now about the work that an organization like Africa Check does. They, of course, will listen to different, statements that leaders of different parties or individuals are making generally, but especially now on the campaign trail, and they'll fact check some of those comments. And you will find often that there is misinformation in the comments that are being made. And it continues to be a problem. Do you get the sense that politicians believe this matter is being taken seriously enough to actually stop them from being the ones that are actually spreading or creating misinformation?
So I think that mis and disinformation is a lot like child sexual abuse material. It's abhorrent. People generally agree it undermines democracy, but it isn't going to just disappear. It's something that's been around since the dawn of time, pretty much. That is mis and disinformation, but it's now able to be spread by just about anyone with a mobile device, So what you then have to do is say we need a few things to try and dissuade people from doing this. So you make political parties sign and pledge to the code of conduct, which all of them have done. That means one of the elements of that is that they commit to not spreading false information. And in fact, it is the only area currently in our law where if you spread false information, there can actually be criminal consequences for you because it's in our electoral act. So the IEC does have the power that if they were to find you guilty of, or if they were to suspect you of spreading disinformation, so if someone reports something to Real 411 and we say, yes, we believe this is disinformation, then the IEC can refer that to the police to go and investigate and ask for that particular person or entity to then be charged under the Electoral Act, right? So that's the kind of ultimate consequence of it. What you have to try and do is persuade political parties that actually what it does is undermine their credibility. It undermines the credibility of not just them, but of all political parties and of the very democratic system that they are seeking to operate within. So it doesn't mean you're going to stop it, but it is about finding ways that you make it harder to spread mis and disinformation, especially from formal sources. There are going to be people, whether they are foreign agents, for example, who seek to, use elections periods to sow disinformation in order to destabilize our country. There will also just be people who are bad actors, people that are getting paid to spread disinformation. So, and again, that comes down to then you say, well, what are the ways that we mitigate this? And you raise the one, which is, what do you do with those who are spreading disinformation? So generally the law isn't a very useful way of dealing with it, right? So imagine I put out on one of the platforms today something that is clearly disinformation. I say, Kathy Motlatlana clearly is working for political party XYZ, and she is actively undermining our democracy, and she's also been seen stuffing ballots into ballot boxes ahead of the elections. If I put that out there, if you want to use the law to stop me, you then have to go and say, okay, William, we believe you've done this. You're going to be charged under this law. You need to appear in court, even on an urgent basis. By the time you go through that process, it's weeks, if not months. And in most instances, it'll take longer than that to deal with it, right? So your consequence management for the person that spreads it is quite a long, tedious process, because that's how the law works and the justice system works. Your alternative is to say, if we can spot this stuff and if we can act on it quickly and identify networks, you can then mitigate the harm that it is going to cause or that it seeks to cause quite significantly. And that's really the thinking behind something like Real 411, and that's why the IEC supports the system along with the information regulator, because it says if we can spot this quickly and remove that post before many people have seen it, it effectively nullifies its impact. It doesn't mean that there shouldn't be consequences for me that spreads it. It just means that the harm that it caused can be significantly reduced.
And I'm just wondering now, given the amount of responsibility and reliance then that there also is on members of the public to come forward and report whatever examples of misinformation, disinformation that they encounter, I wonder how much we are able to pick up on misinformation. Are you able to tell when somebody is deliberately spreading misinformation or even disinformation? I'd love to hear from you on this issue, 086 000 2032. And what do you think is the best thing that we can do to mitigate against this? I want to focus now on social media, because this is really where we are seeing a lot of disinformation and misinformation. People are coming up with accounts, and often they can also be accounts that have big followings, and the statements that they make, the comments that they make, sometimes simply untrue, and yet they continue to do this. And this is not just in a political, in the world of politics, but even in social life, the people are making all sorts of statements and mistruths about other people's lives, and there seems to be no control over it, Mfana.
Yes, I agree. The dialogue that we had on the past few days, we had organizations such as Meta, which is Facebook, WhatsApp, and so on, and Google. What we pick up now, which is what they are telling us, is that they are now putting measures in place to deal with those kinds of things. For an example, the fact-checking, I think they call it the fact-checking mechanisms, to make sure that before something spreads, somebody forwards this thing to many people, it is fact-checked, and if it is found that it's misinformation or disinformation, and it is done with the intention to cause harm, then they are able to prevent that. But like I'm saying, I think that is the major challenge with social media, because of the speed at which information moves in those platforms. But like I'm saying, we as the regulator, we've had sort of engagement with various social media outlets, but it's still a challenge. They tell us that certain measures are put in place, but in certain circumstances, we found that those measures are not adequate.
Okay. I'm going to take some of our callers that are dialing into this conversation. Well, I wonder what you have to say about the issue of misinformation, disinformation. Solim Simang, I hope you're not going to use this as an opportunity to campaign. He, of course, is the DA's provincial candidate in Gauteng. Good morning.
Good morning, Kathy. No, I'm not going to use this as an opportunity to campaign. In fact, I've got a very huge concern and a question. You hear about the legislation that is in place and what you can then do to deal with the problems in South Africa. But what do you do if the problem is coming from outside? We have seen a spike now with recordings of misinformation that is coming from Russia, that is coming from other outside, countries that is talking, that is spreading misinformation about, who's funding political parties and what is then their agenda and all of that. But what do you do in that instance when that information is coming not in South Africa, but it's coming from outside South Africa? That's the question that I would want to then ask. And I can give a number of examples.
And I was going to say, Soli, how do you know that it's coming from outside of South Africa?
Yeah, well, the thing is, they just need to then look at the accounts and then trace where the accounts are emanating from. You know that once you have an X account or you have a Facebook account, you are able to then see who this person would have originated from, or where this account would have been originating from. So we have been able to then trace some of them. It's very interesting where some of them are coming from. But this is why I'm asking, what do you do when that is the case?
Fair enough. Mfana?
Now, that's a difficult one because, Kathy, you would remember, for an example, in the U.S. election in 2016, it was alleged that Russia had actually influenced those elections by spreading information or misinformation that was promoting one party against the other. But as the regulator, we've been able to deal with some of these organizations that operate globally. The only limitation that we have as a regulator, obviously our jurisdiction is confined within the borders of the Republic. Things that happen within the Republic, it doesn't matter where the organization is based. For an example, we are busy with a matter that involves WhatsApp. WhatsApp, which is a company based, it's incorporated in the U.S., it's based in the island, I think Northern Ireland, if I'm not mistaken. We've actually looked at their privacy policy, for an example, and we've told them that their private policy does not comply with POPIA and in South Africa. At first they were resisting, but I think we're dealing with that. So I'm saying, to the extent that it is within our powers and jurisdiction, we're able to deal with those companies. We've had situations where there's been security compromises, for an example, in an organization like TransUnion. TransUnion is a global company. Information was compromised. Some of them, people who were affected were South Africans, and were able to call TransUnion to account. But I agree that, look, at the end of the day, it still becomes difficult. We're dealing with countries and that have certain capabilities which are still remain the challenge for the regulator to deal with.
William, as I give you a chance to come in, because I'm also thinking now about what happened with Bell Pottinger and what are the lessons that we learned from that around how external agencies can very much influence public opinion based on campaigns that they're running on social media. One would think that part of the reason why we even have the information regulator is to better protect ourselves against that. Your view?
Yeah, so as I said, currently the only entity that's able to deal with an instance of mis or disinformation in the election period is the IEC, So the reality for Mr. Msimang is that if they're seeing evidence that there is efforts at foreign interference, they need to report those to the IEC without a doubt. If they're seeing those instances, they can report them to Real 411, which is an independent platform. It can then be assessed. If, for example, on Real 411, we find that there looks as though there's something dodgy about that account, we have a partnership with something called the Digital Forensics Research Lab, who are experts in online investigations, to be able to then carry out an investigation and see, yes, in fact, this does look as though it's part of a network of bad actors, whether they're foreign or local, doesn't matter in that instance. And then because of the relationships that we have with the social media platforms, we can send that information to them and say, please investigate this. If there is, in fact, an effort, a coordinated effort to undermine political party XYZ, and if they find that, then they can do as the social media platform ordinarily does. They can then remove that network and sanction those particular users, and that's the kind of international best practice. It's what's happening, around the world whenever these kinds of incidences are there. What parties have an obligation to do is to report that information. So I would encourage Mr. Msimang, go to real411.org, report the instances that you're finding. If they don't want to do that, they can then submit a formal written complaint to the IEC again with that information, and the IEC will can investigate that. But it's not to go on a station and tell us that you've got this evidence. Well, that's nice, but if you want something to be done about it, you have to use the channels that are there and available to you, and that's what I would encourage him to do.
All right. Anonymous, you're in Johannesburg. Good morning.
Hi, good morning. How are you?
Good. Go for it, Anonymous.
Good. Look, I just want to say something and ask one question. I think I got the answer, but so we know politics is a dirty game, right? We understand that concept, but the thing that irks me about it is that we've got politicians that play this tit-for-tat game with one another, and that is all politics. But what do we do when we have an individual that makes a comment on any particular political party? What do we do if a member of the public comments and it's not in line with the party itself, and the leader of this party starts attacking you and defaming you, swearing at you, takes your photograph from your Facebook account, posts it on his own Facebook page, and make derogatory statements about the person just because it's not in alignment with what they think. And I mean, where do we draw the line? I mean, the POPIA Act does not allow for that. But what do we do? Where's the accountability, especially when it comes from leaders from political parties?
All right. Sounds like a lot of bullying in that too. Anonymous, thanks for raising that issue. Michael's in Gqeberha. Good morning.
Morning, Katie. Who determines what is misinformation or disinformation? Who determines that? Elon Musk said that the price of Twitter was not 44 billion, but it was for free flow of information, right? And if you quite remember, mainstream media that normally drives public discourse told us many years ago that Saddam had weapons of mass destruction. We all know that's a lie now. Is that misinformation? Is that disinformation? So the point I'm trying to make is, who determines what is misinformation or disinformation? Who makes that determination?
Michaels, I was expecting this question and I knew it would come up. Thanks for the question out in Gqeberha. All right. Mr. Gwala, I'm going to give you a chance to go first. And in your responses to our listeners, please include your concluding remarks.
Okay. Yeah, I'll leave Mike to deal, I think, with the last question. But the anonymous question is a simple one. I mean, if somebody takes information, posts it on Facebook and so on, that falls squarely within our mandate as the regulator. He should approach the regulator, and the regulator can assist him with that.
All right, William.
So it's a lovely question. So the reason we developed Real 411 is partly because if you look at the different social media platforms, they each have a very different understanding of what constitutes mis and disinformation. And so one of the things that we said is wrong about that is that actually we need an approach that works for a South African context in line with South African principles around our constitution and freedom of expression. So if you go to Real 411 and you report something as mis or disinformation, the criteria used, in other words, the manner in which it's determined whether something is or isn't mis or disinformation is listed there. The short answer is it's a matter of transparency and it's a matter of context. So something may be disinformation today, but it may actually be true tomorrow, right? So, and that's because the nature of things changes. So it was the case at the start of COVID, for example, to say, if I went around saying, I've got this brand new vaccine, and if you have it, it'll cure you, it's made with garlic and herbs and whatever else, that would have been disinformation. But if after the first year we suddenly said there is actually a vaccine and it is effective, then that would no longer have been disinformation, that would have been true. So there are lines to be drawn on these things, which is why context is often important. But for us, it's about the way that you say these things do vary. So Real 411, every complaint that comes in, it gets reviewed by 3 separate reviewers who've all been trained on all of these concepts around disinformation, incitement, and hate speech and harassment. And then they review it according to the same criteria. And if there's consensus on those 3, the Secretariat, who's another qualified lawyer, determines, yes, this is or it isn't mis or disinformation, or it is or it isn't incitement, or it's got some elements of disinformation, but it doesn't qualify as disinformation. And that's the way that we choose to operationalize working against it. Because, if you get to the point where you say, well, no one can really determine it, then you go, well, how do you actually combat and address this problem? Because the reality is that it is a threat to our democracy.
Would the Real 411 be able to give us clarity on who has been the best president post-democracy, factually? No,
because that's a question of perspective, right? On what do you determine is the best president? Is it on how many laws they've passed? Is it on economic growth? Is it based on socio-economic development, protection of rights? Is it about running free, fair elections? Is it about the number of speeches they've made? There's so many parameters that you would do that, and that's kind of an electioneering thing, right? Where you'll say, we've got the best leader. She stands up for the right things. She does all the greatest things. And that's, you're going to go, well, good, that's electioneering, whether that's factual or not, right? But it is and that's one of the key issues, is it's got to be demonstrably and clearly and evidently false information in order for it to constitute an element of mis or disinformation.
Let me thank you both for this conversation. Really, really informative and educational. That is William Bird, the Director of Media Monitoring Africa, and Mfana Gwala, Commissioner at the Information Regulator. You can go on to Media Monitoring as website. You'll be able to find an icon there for the Real 411 for those of you that are asking and would want to follow up. It's 11 o'clock. Time for the latest news.
In our top stories, 6 suspects arrested for murder of Kaizer Chiefs player, and EU countries urged to fight racism in policing. Good morning. 6 suspects have been arrested for the alleged hijacking and murder of Kaizer Chiefs defender Luke Vleers. The suspects were apprehended in Slovoval in Soweto. Vleers was shot dead in an attempted hijacking in Roodepoort, west of Johannesburg last week. The car has since been recovered. Gauteng Police spokesperson Lieutenant Colonel Mavele Masondo says the suspects are part of a syndicate.
Police believe that the suspects are part of a syndicate that is responsible for car hijacking in Gauteng, and the search for more suspects is continuing. The suspects are expected to appear before Roodepoort Magistrates Court on Friday, the 12th of April 2024.
Police in the northwest have arrested another suspect in the kidnapping case of 2 teenage cousins in Brits. This brings the number of arrests to 8. Humphrey Martin and 6 others were arrested last month and have been remanded in custody until next Tuesday. The suspect arrested yesterday is reportedly the owner of the home in Klipgat, where the 2 kidnapped teenagers were found late last month. He is facing charges of kidnapping and extortion. Patavia Mohammed and his 17-year-old cousin were kidnapped on the 6th of March while on their way to school. They were found by police nearly 2 weeks later. The Northwest Police spokesperson Sabata Mukhwabone.
The team arrested a 50-year-old man on Tuesday, the 9th of April 2024 in Brits. According to information, the suspect is the owner of the house where the victims were kept. This brings a number of arrested suspects to 8. The suspect is expected to appear before the Brits Magistrate Court today.
The DA MP Silose Tlolo says the admission by the Public Works Minister Sihle Zikalala that about 13.8 million rand may have been lost to corruption across the Extended Public Works Programme EPWP may be a drop in the ocean. He says there could be more money lost not only to government employees but to third parties. Zikalala had revealed that through verification they discovered odd transactions on the EPW allocated budgets, which could have been lost to theft, undeserving beneficiaries and corruption. Seitlolo says it's disheartening that people who are being paid substantial amounts of salaries are taking from the poor.
The response by the minister to suggest that to go further to the statement that yes, they've identified these particular corrupt activities from these particular government employees, but the fact that over 14 million has been lost due to corruption, and yet there is absolutely no consequence management, leaves much to be desired and begs a lot of questions more than answers.
The Senior Director for Water and Sanitation in the Nelson Mandela Municipality, Barry Martin, says despite the metro slipping from the Grasparva historical drought, which nearly saw taps run dry, it's still not out of the woods. Martin says there's still a long way to go before the metro's water supply is functioning at optimal capacity.
As of last year, November, the Mpofu Dam is still sitting at 40%, and as a result, we 40%, meaning we still have 40% drought into the supply system of NBM. With that in mind, we realize that we're not out of the wood yet, and we still have to dedicate our water supply for the people, and that is the biggest dedicated water supply to NBM.
Further field, and finally, the European Union's Fundamental Rights Agency has called for member countries to do more to tackle racism in policing. The BBC's Bethany Bell has the details.
The agency said racism in policing has far-reaching effects, fueling social exclusion and undermining trust in police forces. It said most EU countries don't collect systematic official data on racist incidents by the police. The agency called on EU countries to do more to systematically report and record such misconduct. The report also noted that while most European countries have police watchdogs, many are not independent. It called on countries to increase diversity in police forces.
Recapping the top stories, 6 suspects have been arrested for the alleged hijacking and murder of Kaizer Chiefs defender Luke Vleers. The suspects were arrested in Slovovel in Soweto. For SAfm News, I am Anne Musa.
SAfm 104 to 107 nationwide.
Rewind the years and relive all the action on the 18. Don Hannibal Smith leads the team of 4 members of a former commando outfit. His plans may be unorthodox, but they're effective. Lieutenant Templeton Pegg, second in command, a smooth-talking conman, and the appropriator of vehicles and other useful items. The team pilot, Captain Howling Mad Murdoch. Howling Mad. His name says it all. Sergeant First Class Mr. T, the team's strongman and mechanic. Join them as they embark on epic adventures and missions, all in attempts to clear their names, weekdays at 12. Channel your inner A game with the A-Team, only on S3.
2 years since winning the EFC middleweight title in the most dramatic and controversial fashion, Luke Michael finally defends his belt for the very first time at EFC 112 against the imposing submission machine, J.P. Kruger. And in the co-main event, featherweight champion Iga Smiley Cabeza becomes the next athlete aiming for champ status as he battles the imposing Kaleka Block Kabanda. EFC 112 live this Thursday. Watch it on SABC Sport Channel on DTT Channel 4 from 7 p.m. Brought to you by SABC Sport.
SAfm Sunrise with Stephen Grootes.
We don't yet have the formal reasons for this decision. Do you have any insight at this stage into why the Electoral Court made the decision?
Well, we don't know the reasons, but we can talk to the merits of our appeal. One being on the issue of bias, but also citing the wrong legislation of the law in a form of Section 47(1)(e). That in of itself then obviously becomes the second grounds at which we then lodged our appeal. Section 47(1)(e), Stephen, is a piece of legislation that gives powers to the National Assembly to make a determination on membership, not for the IEC to make a determination and to invoke on the basis of candidacy.
And Ntlamula Ntlela, thank you very much indeed. Spokesperson for the political party Umkhonto weSizwe, you with SAfm.
SAfm Sunrise with Stephen Grootes, 6 to 9 a.m. The Talking Point with Kathy Mohlahlana. Weekdays, 9 a.m. till midday.
You're listening to The Talking Point. It's 8 after 11 o'clock. Welcome to the final hour of the show. So coming up in this hour, we're focusing on the issue of electricity. We're joined by the Minister of Electricity, Joseyenso Ramokgopa. Mr. Ramokgopa, good morning to you. Thank you for your time this morning.
Yeah, good morning, Casey, and good morning to your listeners, and thank you very much for the invitation.
So, of course, there's a lot about electricity that has been in the news. Yes, we've experienced some ease when it comes to load shedding, but of course, NERSA has gone and ruffled everybody's feathers because we now have guidelines for Stage 16 load shedding. It comes, though, as the Deputy President speaking yesterday at an event commemorating 30 years of democracy said, well, he believes that load shedding will be a thing of the past by the end of 2024. I want to play what the Deputy President had to say, and then you can weigh in on this.
We have made further strides in addressing load shedding, ensuring security, enhancing logistics systems, and improving ports and rail networks. And I would like to assure you, ladies and gentlemen, that there is a national plan, or rather plans are in place nationally to ensure that load shedding is ended this year. I know you don't believe me. Professor Mpedi, they think I'm electioneering. No, it is true. That's why I'm not saying it will end before elections. I'm saying this year.
It's a commitment, Minister, that we've heard one too many times. And I think that's why even the audience responded in the way that it did. But practically, why does this government believe that load shedding would have come to an end by 2024?
Well, let's interrogate what the DP has said. The DP makes the point that we have made significant progress in the resolution of load shedding. And that's a factually correct articulation. So we have not resolved load shedding. We have made that progress. The last time I was here, when you invited me to join you on your program, I had shared with you the interventions we are making in the short term. I made the point that we're retaining 3 units at Kusile, and I was confident that will return them before the end of the year. And indeed, those 3 units had returned, Unit 1, 2, and 3. When I was here, I made the point that we are going to return Unit 1 in Quebec before the end of the year. That unit has returned by the end of the year, last year, 2023. I made the point that we're going to go on an aggressive maintenance program on the back of the fiscal relief injection received from National Treasury of 252 billion rands. And I said that the maintenance intervention would have been something at an unprecedented scale, at least in the recent past. And indeed, in December, going into January of 2024, we took out 18% of our total generation capacity, about 9,000 megawatts. The last time we did the scale of planned maintenance was in 2020. We did that, and the lights were on from the 14th of December to the 1st of January. I made the point that we are progressing very well on ensuring that we're introducing the reforms in relation to the establishment of the National Transmission Company of South Africa. Yesterday when I did the update, I said it has met all condition precedent. So this board of the NTCSA is up and running. And I said that I was confident that the 6th Parliament rises would have passed through the Electricity Regulation Amendment Act, which introduces a number of players on the generation side to help us not just to rely on ESCOM, but to introduce additional players to ensure energy security going into the future. The National Assembly has passed that, and the NCOP is going to consider it. I'm still confident that before the Parliament rises, we would have approved it. And then the lights are on for more hours of the day than it has been the case comparable period last year in 2023. So the DP is factually correct. And the point I make all the time, you don't have to believe me. Don't believe anything I'm saying to you. Are your lights on for most of the day compared to the same period last year? And everyone on the call objectively will say, yes, the lights are on. And then the DP makes another point. He says there is no relationship in the resolution of load shedding and the elections. Because this is not a switch that we just turn it on and off. It requires extensive work. And so just to share with you again the details and the listeners, what will happen this year? I've made good on all the promises I've made. Not a single one has not been met. One, I'm making this commitment that we are retaining Unit 4 at Medupi, an additional 800 megawatts. We'll bring it on stream by August of this year. This is a unit that was damaged by a massive fire about 3 years ago, and the initial estimate was that it's going to return by 2025 because of the lead time required for us to get a brand new generator, the stator there. We looked across the world. We found a second-hand generator. We purchased it at Netherlands. It's 35 years old. It's got 15 years of generating capacity. It still has got the warranties, guarantees from the original equipment manufacturer. It's good to go. This unit now has been offloaded now at Medupi, and I'm confident that it will come on stream by August, 800 megawatts. We'll complete the work we're doing at Kusile. Still a construction site. There's unit number 6 there that has not been synchronized or fired. We have not started it. We've been working on it. That unit will come in September of this year, another 800 megawatts. I'm making the promise that we are going to bring unit number 2 of Quebec, 983 megawatts by September of this year. So by September of this year, we'll have 800 from Medupi. You'll have 800 from Kusile, that's 1,600. You'll have 980 from Quebec. So you're talking about approximately 2,500 megawatts, additional megawatts on the grid. And then we made the point that when I was on your show, that we are accelerating the rollout of rooftop solar solutions. And this on the back of the reforms that government has introduced, the incentives that the Minister of Finance has introduced. with regards to the rollout of rooftop solar by both industry and households. And I said that we are going to accelerate their rollout. So if you look at 2022, we had about 2,200 megawatts that was installed. When I was on your show, I think we were just around 4,000, and now we're reaching over 5,000 megawatts. So on the back of these reforms, households are beginning to generate on their own. They're less reliant on the grid. As part of our total strategy, the DP makes the point that the president introduced the Energy Action Plan. That guides the work that we're doing. So we're not just relying on ESCOM. We're doing new generation capacity. So yes, we are on course to resolve this problem. And of course, the skeptics, naysayers did not believe that we are on course. And I just said to the team, just remain transfixed on the resolution of the problem. And then the people will see that their lights will be on for most of the time. But once we do all of these things, it doesn't mean that the country has achieved energy security. What is energy security? Is that your lights might be on for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 364 a year. But the economy must grow. For the economy to grow, you need more investments. You need to broaden the industrial base. As you broaden the industrial base, you are going to bring in more energy-intensive users. There are minerals that are being discovered. Minister Mantashe is very aggressive in that space. There are rare earth minerals, new minerals of the future that are being used for the conversion of the combustion engine to the EV. So South Africa sits on those deposits. So the mines, for them to operate, they'll need this kind of electricity. So the economy must grow. So we must bring more generating capacity greater than what I've shared with you for us to say that we have achieved energy security. Those are two different conversations. On ending load shedding and energy security. Of course, the other one is conditional. First end load shedding and then get to energy security.
So while I really appreciate part of the feedback that you have given, especially responding to the issues that had come up in our first conversation, and you could well believe that things are on track to end load shedding by 2024, or by the end of this year rather. It still doesn't explain then why, from a policy and a regulatory framework, NERSA is preparing for what could potentially be an even worse outlook when it comes to the stages of load shedding. That is part of the indication of publishing guidelines for a stage such as stage 16 load shedding.
No, so what they are doing is to allocate the total grid to a stage of load shedding. So I suggest that they don't rely on snippets. Just have an appreciation of what they are doing. So they are taking the total grid, what is on the grid, close to 50,000 megawatts, and they are allocating all of that to a stage of load shedding. That's one. The second one is just in the discipline of doing things right. First is that you don't leave it to the imaginations and the discretion of a system operator when you go to higher stages of load shedding to determine what are the guiding principles and protocols of how load shedding is going to be affected, because that has got huge implications on the energy-intensive users, on the hospitals, the clinics, you mentioned them, public institutions, including ourselves as households. So you are introducing a degree of predictability that if in an event that you go to higher stages of load shedding, this is what is going to guide the system operator, so that there's some degree of predictability and planning on the part of the stakeholders and those who are participants in the South African economy, who rely on electricity. And then just give me a chance to explain, and then the third one, the intensity of load shedding does not suggest that you are close to a grid collapse, because that's what some of the things I've been hearing and some of the questions that have been put to me. It simply means that, in fact, there's greater protection on the grid. And the last point to be made here is that I always bring this closer to home. When those who can afford choose to take a medical cover, it doesn't follow that tomorrow you'll be in hospital. You are simply building an insurance to ensure that in an event of a catastrophic event and mishap, in fact, I am covered. So that's what they are doing to ensure that there's a discipline on how you manage this, and there's an allocation of what is on the grid to a stage of load shedding. So there is no relationship in what they are doing and the progress we're making on the resolution of load shedding. They simply are making the point that if sometime in the future you get to a situation where there's a major event that undermines our ability to be able to reliably provide this electricity, and the catastrophe is of such a nature that it removes a significant proportion of the generation capacity. This is what the system operator will do to ensure that we protect the grid. That's simply what they're doing.
So, Minister, I appreciate that, what you're saying around the protection of the grid and the need for predictability. But is that not what was provided for, even when the development of stages 1 to stage 8 then was put into effect? So the introduction of this code of practice from stage 9 to stage 16, does it effectively do more than what was needed for stage 1 to stage 8?
No, I just said to you that what it does, it allocates what is available to the grid to a stage of load shedding. That's what it does. And you simply want to correct the point, like you've made the last day when I was
I'm asking you to clarify for me,
yes,
Minister.
I'm clarifying to you. I've just gave you three, if you like, areas of intervention. First is to ensure that the total grid is allocated to a stage of load shedding. That's the first point that I'm making. The second one is that you remove a discretion from the system operator without the knowledge of the major players in the energy ecosystem, including households, on what it means if you get to a major event and, in fact, you are generating capacity is severely constrained, and then you have to apply higher stages of load shedding. So it introduces that degree of predictability. This is what it means. And the third point that I've made to you is that it's part of strengthening our resolve to ensure that the grid is protected at all times. But in this instance, it's not allocating just part of what is available on the grid, but the total availability on the grid is attached to a stage of load shedding. And that's what they are doing.
So maybe let's look at it from a functionality point of view to say, what is the practical problems that this code of practice is solving for? And if you can give us sort of the experiences or the lessons that have been learned with having to conduct load shedding and the problems or the challenges that has brought about, that has necessitated this code of practice.
Well, the first point is that the ministry is not the custodian of that process, and I'm sure that you'll be better served by inviting the players in that space, those who are responsible for that. So that's that. So we are just one of, if you like, the stakeholders in that space. So it's simply trying to ensure that in an event of a major catastrophe, God forbid, and the significant generation capacity is removed from the grid. This is how the system operator is going to manage the process going into the future. That's what it does. And then what we are seeking to do as the ministry is to essentially make that point mute. And how do you make it mute? Is to ensure that the there's a reliable supply of energy, uninterrupted quality supply. And in fact, the system operator will not be called upon to initiate intensified stages of load shedding. And if we have it our way, I'm confident we will succeed. In fact, the system operator will not be called at any point to initiate any load shedding because we'll be having a generation capacity that is sufficient to meet the demand.
There've previously been concerns with compliance from some municipalities that were not necessarily keeping up with the load shedding schedules as provided for by ESCOM or as instructed by ESCOM. Does the new code of practice deal with that issue?
No, the new code of practice deals with the guidance on how you are going to implement load shedding. So that's one. Two is that it is the responsibility of the ones who does distribution to ensure that whatever the system operator calls on them to do, inconsistent with the provisions of the code, they get to do that. Then you have had instances where municipalities were aware of the megawatts that they need to curtail or to deny their users in order to contribute to the lessening of the demand on the grid and therefore protection of the grid. They were not complying with that. So there are rules and then there's compliance. So it's like you're driving on the road. It says the maximum speed is 80 kilometers an hour, and then someone goes over 80 kilometers an hour. In this instance, the code will have said that in a build-up area, dense area, we need to drive in this portion stretch of the road 80 kilometers an hour. That's the rule. That someone does not comply to that is a different conversation that requires different instruments to address it. And that's why in instances where municipalities were found to not be compliant and not meeting those they are contributing to the lessening of demand on the grid by implementing load shedding, ESCOM has gone ahead to say, I'm taking over the responsibility from you because you are not discharging it in terms of the code. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to do it on your behalf because the law provides that I'm responsible for the protection of the grid. And I've delegated that to you, and you seem not to be enthusiastic. You are reluctant to enforce it. I'm going to do it, so I take over that responsibility. From now on, you are not responsible. That's a different conversation. It's quite apart from what the codes provide for.
Has there been any involvement from you when it comes to intervening on this matter of compliance?
No. Remember that the system operator is like autonomous. So it's like saying, we remember, the conversations, and I also get to be called by some of the players in the space to say, there's this big event that is happening. Can the minister ensure that we are not load shed? No, the minister doesn't sit with those powers. Those powers sit with the system operator because he or she has got an overarching view of the performance of the system and what is required for us to be able to protect the system. Otherwise, you are going to expose it to some degree of experience. Whenever it's convenient for the minister or the powers that be, they can decide this area will not be load shed, that area will be load shed. So you introduce credibility by ensuring that there's a degree of independence in how that is being executed. So I will not be approached to say, but these ones are not complying. All I'll be told is that municipality X is not complying. And the best I can do is to urge the municipality, please comply. But ultimately, the system operator will make the determination that besides all of our efforts and trying to canvass other players to encourage this municipality to meet their obligations, they are not doing it now. I'm enforcing it. I'm taking over the responsibility of initiating load shedding in their jurisdiction, their area of distribution.
All right.
And that's what has happened with a number of municipalities.
We're going to continue the conversation in a moment. We're in conversation with the Minister of Electricity, Khosienzo Ramokgopa. It's just after 11:30, time for the latest news headlines.
In your headlines for this hour, Transport Minister Sindisiwe Chikunga has announced that from midnight tomorrow, e-tolls will be scrapped in Gauteng. SANRAL will be able to borrow funding from the National Treasury to substitute the funds generated by e-tolls for road infrastructure. In other news, the ANC in Mpumalanga has suspended its provincial treasurer Mandla Msibi for misconduct. Msibi's membership has been suspended for 3 years for violating the party's constitution. And lastly, 6 suspects have been arrested for the alleged hijacking and murder of Kaizer Chiefs defender Luke Fleurs. These suspects were apprehended in Sloverville in Soweto. I have more on these and other stories at 12 for SAfm News. I'm Eva Chipa.
SAfm 104 to 107 nationwide.
For over 40 years, people around the world have been spinning and winning thanks to the Wheel of Fortune. Now it's your turn to take the prize as this legendary game show finally launches in South Africa weekdays 7:30 p.m. on S3, plus an omnibus Saturdays at 10:30 a.m. with rebroadcast on SABC2 9:30 a.m. Don't miss your chance to be part of history. Enter now on www.wheeloffortunesa.tv and let the wheel decide your fate. Channel your inner wordsmith on Wheel of Fortune on S3. Open up.
South Africa is facing an increase in people diagnosed with non-communicable diseases such as diabetes, cancers, hypertension, lung problems, and obesity. This also increases the number of people living with these diseases and mental health.
Many people living with these preventable diseases may not be immediately aware unless they go for health screening and testing.
It is our responsibility to invest in our healthier future through regular physical activity, healthy diets, and avoiding risky health behaviors such as alcohol and tobacco use.
The Department of Health urges people to go for regular health screening for early detection and effective treatment if they are diagnosed with any of these conditions.
This message is brought to you by the National Department of Health.
2 years since winning the EFC middleweight title in the most dramatic and controversial fashion, Luke Michael finally defends his belt for the very first time at EFC 112 against the imposing submission machine, J.P. Kruger. And in the co-main event, featherweight champion Iga Smiley Cabeza becomes the next athlete aiming for champ status as he battles the imposing Kaleka Block Kabanda. EFC 112 live this Thursday. Watch it on SABC Sport Channel on DTT Channel 4 from 7 p.m. Brought to you by SABC Sport.
The Talking Point with Kathy Motlatlana. Weekdays 9 a.m. till midday.
All right, we continue the conversation on the Talking Point. We are talking to the Electricity Minister, Hosienzo Ramokgopa. I'm going to take your calls and contributions for this conversation. In Kimberley, Anonymous, good morning. Good morning, Anonymous.
Morning, can you hear me, Katie?
Yes, I can now.
Okay, no, thank you. Just an appreciation to the minister. I think the work that is done so far, it's really commendable, and we can see the impact that is there. I hope they can try and keep in post-elections. That's the word of comment. But what I wanted to just clarify or just seek from the minister is to just indicate, I am mentioning the rollout plan in terms of renewable program that is being implemented, and what he has indicated is to say that what we have achieved thus far is to just intensify the maintenance in the generation space, which is where our base load is coming from. I just wanted to get a sentiment from him is that what the current economy that we have and studies that have shown that these renewables that we have are not really offering much to the grid, but it comes at a huge cost to ESCOM with the PPAs that they sign on a 20-year agreement. Is that really beneficial to us as ESCOM, because this is not dispatchable power, and this conversation hasn't really been engaged thoroughly out there. And yeah, I'll leave it at that. Thanks for the opportunity.
All right, thanks for that question. Neja, you're in Mangaung. Good morning.
Good morning, Kathy. How are you? And Dr. Hussein Ramokgopa.
Fine.
Good morning.
Morning.
Kathy, stage 16 outage suggested by the nurse really is a worrisome. But doctor, 14 days without this load shedding as we speak now, really you are doing a good, wonderful job. I saw your plan will brought us yield results. You are confident, you are faithful, and your faith is very firm. You are not like a jellyfish. You're optimistic. Now, doctor, without time consuming, doctor, what should role we play as a community? Let me take a look at Gerrans town in Free State. Since September last year, Clarence community were without load shedding for the period of 6 months. Brain behind the whole scheme was a guy called Kruger. He was working with the community, creates WhatsApp group. He is the person put everything together and organizes. They managed to reduce electric consumption by 10% to 20%. So, doctor, what are you taking on that brainstorm? Thank you, doctor.
Okay, Neje, thanks for the call. Percy, you're in Matlosana. Good morning.
Good morning, this Kathy and your guest. This Kathy, I want to ask your guest, it will take how long to stop load shedding because of Banbolepe when he was appointed. The mandate is to stop load shedding, not to speak nice about load shedding. It will be end next year, 18 months, but they will to stop load shedding. Please ask your guest, it will take how long to stop load shedding because of, he speak about the history. We don't want history. We want load shedding to be stopped.
All right, Percy, thanks for that question. I've got another question for you, this time off the WhatsApp voice note line.
Hi, this is Kathy. It's Mpoye from Frede. Can you please ask the minister for me here? And since they're talking about renewables and the independent power producers, aren't they creating a problem where big companies, which are Eskom's big customers, are going now to produce electricity for themselves, and Eskom on the other hand will spend more money in improving the power stations and all, and in the end you find that they don't have, when everything is fixed, they don't have the customers to buy the electricity, and it now becomes the fact that they have to now again and again increase the tariffs. Thank you.
All right. So, Minister, I know that we don't have a lot of time, but so those will be all the questions I take from our listeners. An opportunity for you to respond.
Maybe just the first question, Anonymous, is correct. I think it's important that we place a lot of emphasis on base load, and by that I mean electricity that is available 24/7. That is not dependent on weather conditions. And I always make the point that there is no country whose economy is powered by renewables. So I think it's making a valid point. But also what we have to accept is that the issues around the emissions and the impact on the climate resulting in devastation of communities and economies is real. So it's a scientifically established fact. So what we're trying to do, Anonymous, is that first is that to protect the base load. So I'm talking of coal is still part of the IRP going into the future. Of course, at a declining rate as part of the total aggregate. We're going to be introducing programs now on gas to power. That's a part of base load, and then you know that we have announced our interventions on increasing the capacity of nuclear. And of course, renewables relies on the redundancy of base load. So it's not doing one over the other, but it's doing both. And just the last question is because it's linked to the first one. You are absolutely correct, Percy, in saying that what you are observing is that your energy-intensive users, your mines, big industries, retailers are the first ones to jump onto the bandwagon of if you like, self-generation or entering into private transaction. And if you look at those, the profile of those energy-intensive users, they are first the big payers to municipalities and the most diligent payers. And you're absolutely correct. So municipalities are likely going to be left with Those who are delinquent, I mean those who have got the means to pay but choose not to pay. And then, of course, the poor who just don't have the means to pay. So municipalities' ability to generate revenue is going to be gradually eroded, including ESCOM, because they will not be relying on ESCOM. They'll be going to private producers of energy. So there's an intervention we're doing working with the COPTA. And like I said, on the ESCOM side, you'll see in the next 3 weeks or so, we'll be announcing new generation capacity that comes from ESCOM. And that generation capacity really fits the requirements of some of the energy-intensive users who want to transition to green energy. And then on the experiences of what communities can play, a number of roles. So one of the things we've seen in the failure of distribution infrastructure is illegal connections. It's people who are choosing not to pay, and those who can, especially those who can afford. What that has done is that when you overload the distribution infrastructure, the substation, the transformers, they explode, and then communities go for an extended period of time without electricity outside the load shedding schedule. So we're working with the communities to ensure that we remove illegal connections and ensure that those who need electricity, and we know all households need electricity, they are correctly identified and then they are connected. And those who can pay should pay. And then rolling out smart meters, ESCOM is doing that, has done a pilot in 4 ways. What that does, we're able to reduce the burden that the houses places on the grid. So essentially, when instead of doing full-scale load shedding, using smart solution, you simply disconnect the geysers, the pool pumps, the energy-intensive use appliances in the households, and allow the house to still have the light, to still have the fridge will be on, they can watch TV. So it's essentially without major disruption to their lives. And that's what we've seen as some of the creativity in that space, including the rollout of rooftop solar solutions. We are trying to redesign, if you like, some of the grants that are meant to connect the new households to the grid, and also the subsidy that is given to the poor on free electricity. We redesign that so that we use that allocation to roll out the if you like, solar PV for poor households so that they can benefit in the same manner as the rich households are doing. On the issues of when, so there is the assignment given to me by the president was twofold. First, start by reducing the intensity and frequency of load shedding, so that we are on course to do that. I just shared with you before the program started additional generation capacity that we're bringing on stream. And I'm saying by the end of the year, a marked difference. But even if there's no load shedding at that time, remember that the economy must grow. So what we must do is to aggressively introduce new generation capacity. That's not a switch that essentially declare that there will be new generation. There has to be studies that must be done, investment must be done, gets to financial close, construct, connect to the grid, and that's why we're working on the acceleration of transmission so that we don't just over-rely on ESCOM. We also have new generation players, and that's why transmission is important. We have introduced the reforms. Once we get all of that aligned, and I get to know what is new that is confirmed coming from new players, then we'll be able to come to the nation and say we are confident that by this date we'll be done with load shedding, but we have created sufficient generation capacity that has got enough buffer to help the economy to grow. That's the end result. Once we're at that stage, I'll be the first one to come and announce. But in relation to the reduction of the intensity and frequency, we are on course, as everyone can see.
So then, just to be clear, Minister, you're not, as we speak, as confident as the Deputy President that it would have ended by the end of the year?
No, I'm not there at that point, but I'll come back to you and the nation and say by this time, and if that time is by end of the year, I'll share with you and show you where this is coming from. What the Deputy President was raising, as I went through what they were saying, is that this is the target we have set for ourselves. It has to end because we must get the economy up and running. I've shown you where this new generation is coming. I'm going back to the President, the DP and Cabinet to say from private sector we can get this following new generation capacity if we make the following interventions. To the extent that the ministry can do those interventions, we'll do them. To the extent that we need collaboration from other ministries, accelerating water use license applications, EIAs, Minister Chrissy, Minister Mkhunu are already working on that, ensuring that we provide way leaves by municipalities, the right of way, and expropriation of land in instances where we have to roll out transmission so that we connect this line. Once all of that is aligned, I'll know what is the additional generation capacity on top of the 2,500 I've given you.
All right.
Once I get that number and I know by this date, then I'm the first one to announce to everyone.
Josenzo Ramokgopa is the Minister of Electricity. It brings us to the end of our show on the Talking Point for today. Of course, we're back with you tomorrow between 9 and midday. Up next, the book reading.
Ready, Steady, Cook South Africa. The Thriller Minute daily treat is sure to spice up your Monday to Friday menu from Monday 18 March at 7 p.m. If you and someone you know think you're ready and steady to cook along the esteemed chefs on this juicy television show, you can WhatsApp the producers on 068-675-2542. Channel your inner 5-star chef with Ready, Steady, Cook. Weekdays at 7 p.m. only on
Wake up to the stories that warm your heart and ignite your spirit every morning on Expresso. Do you know a young hero making waves in your community? We want to hear from you. Share their inspiring stories with us on our WhatsApp line 063-408-8863 and let's celebrate their achievements together. And here's the best part. You could join us live in studio to tell your story. Expresso Morning Show every weekday morning at 6 to 9 a.m. only on S3.
The Saturday play.
I don't know what you're talking about now, Pramay.
You think you're clever, ne? Look at me. Huh? Are you happy?
Hey, Pramay, I have to go now.
You're not going anywhere, son.
Come on, Pramay. Catch me, Tebogo Sefako Matenji, on the Saturday play. Stop twisting my arm, Pramay.
I want to teach you a lesson, son.
Pramay, please, man. Just leave me alone, Pramay.
Hey, son. Catch the Saturday play between 9 and 10 p.m. Only on SAfm.
SAfm.
The book reading. Please note the views expressed in this book are not that of the station. Listeners' discretion is advised. SAfm presents another episode of Why Men Hate Women, written by Kopano Ratile. When we recognize that violence can be baked into rules, institutions, or policies, we become aware that this is in fact a violent society where laws give rights to only some people. Which rights are granted to whom is characterized by an element of arbitrariness, the right to vote, work, or have shelter. There is violence in an economic and political system where company executives, politicians, and government directors are handsomely rewarded, while teachers, domestic workers, and nurses are paid much less. People might not even think to raise this, because many of us